All right. And we are on page 233, if you have the Eitz Chaim. Uh, in any case, Genesis chapter 38. So where we left off, Joseph had been thrown into the pit, stripped of his garment, thrown into the pit uh, by his brothers. Ultimately, Midianites, Ishmaelites take him out of the pit, and he gets sent down to Egypt. Meanwhile, the brothers went back to their father with that coat, that distinctive coat that was the sign of Jacob's favoritism, really, for Joseph, and they say, "Look, is this your son's coat?"
Uh-huh.
And deceive him in the process. And as I mentioned last time, it seems to be kind of payback for the way he had deceived his father. Jacob had deceived Isaac, uh, and in order to win the blessing which Isaac intended for Esau. So Joseph has gone down into Egypt, and we will hold our breath to see what happens to him there. In the meantime, we have this interlude, chapter 38 of Genesis, again, page 233, if you have the Eitz Chaim. About that time, it's not quite sure what that means. Usually it says after these things, if it wants to deal with time at all, but here it doesn't. Here it says at that time, suggesting that somehow it's around the time, not clear exactly when, that Joseph is sold into slavery in Egypt. Judah leaves his brothers. Now, it's important to remember who Judah is. Judah is the Judas in this story. He is the one whose idea was to kill Joseph. Ultimately, he doesn't succeed, but he was the most forceful in actually calling for Joseph's death. So bear that in mind as we see what happens to him. So he leaves his brothers and camps near a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. This is his friend. And Judah saw the daughters of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he married her and cohabited with her. Now, Shua is not the name of his wife. It is the name of his mechutin, as they would say in Yiddish, his wife's father. The wife is anonymous. We have no idea who she is, but she's a Canaanite. And according to later Jewish tradition, even in the Bible, you're not supposed to marry a Canaanite. That doesn't seem to apply in the time of Genesis. The Rashi is a little troubled by this. And there's another, you could read the word Canaanite, though it's very forced, as meaning merchant. So the Rashi attempts to get out of that seeming contradiction. But it's not really a contradiction at all. One can assume that things change and times change. Anyway, he marries her and cohabits with her. And you know what? I want to make sure if everybody could mute, because I do hear if you're not muted, there's something in the background. Just maybe, in fact, I can have everybody. Well, let me see if I can do it. Just
You go to participants. It should be.
I did. Everybody is now muted. Thank you, Sandy. Okay, so he marries the daughter of Shua, and he cohabits with her, and she conceives and bears a son named Um, and then she has another child whose name is Onan. And finally, she has another child whose name is Shelah. Okay. Um, and that is, so now Judah has three children by his Canaanite wife. And now it comes time, so you can see time has passed very quickly, because now it's time for the firstborn, to get married. Judah gave a wife to his firstborn. Her name was Tamar, but Judah's firstborn, was displeasing to the Lord, and the Lord took his life. We don't know what he did. And one could even assume that he simply dies prematurely, dies young, and it's attributed to, he must have done something. So obviously, if he died young, there was a problem, and God, who is just, must have taken his life for that reason. But we really don't know. It's very terse. So then, notice, by the way, the emphasis on firstborn. Judah got a wife for his firstborn. Her name was Tamar, but Judah's firstborn, was displeasing. So it really wants us to notice, the text wants us to notice that this is the firstborn. Right? And throughout Genesis, we've seen this displacement of the firstborn. And we see it here also. And now it's time for the second son. So Judah says to Onan, join your brother's wife, and do your duty by her as a brother-in-law to provide offspring for your brother. So this is, which you're probably familiar with, this is Levirate marriage that's being proposed here. So the idea here is, if someone dies without leaving any children, their brother's, the dead husband's brother, has an obligation under biblical law, and not just biblical law. This seems to be an institution that was well known in the ancient world. This is not just an Israelite thing, that the brother will now take on as his wife the widow of his deceased brother, and he will have children with her, but those children would not be considered his own. Those are the children of the deceased brother. He's simply standing in, and he will essentially raise this child, but he will not, there won't be any direct benefits to him. And therefore, it's a sacrifice, what he's doing. It seems that there are really two reasons for this. One would be that the idea of perpetuating someone's name, that they shouldn't be lost, that every person should be able to continue through their prodigy in some way. And the other is probably protection for the widow, because it's not a good place to be in, and therefore, when the brother marries her, now the brother himself could be married. But remember that this is, at this time, a polygamous society. And by the way, this is an exception to a biblical law, which comes later, after Sinai, that you can't marry your sister-in-law. It's one, even if your brother is deceased. It's among the laws of incest, which we find in the book of Leviticus. So it's a forbidden relationship, but this is an exception. Whether it was actually forbidden in those days, it's not clear. It's certainly forbidden by the time of the book of Leviticus. At any rate, Onan doesn't want to do it. So what does he do? He said, but he knew that the seed would not count as his, and he let it go to waste whenever he joined with his brother's wife. So this is coitus interruptus, right? He would have sex with her, but he'd pull out so that she would not be able to become pregnant because he didn't want actually to do what he was meant to do. Now, you even if you're not familiar with this passage, you probably heard about Onan, or at least Onanism, right? Which is an old-fashioned word for masturbation, specifically male masturbation. The idea that you're spilling your seed to the ground rather than using it in the way that it is intended, which is heterosexual sex up to and including consummation, right? So the idea that there's a biblical prohibition against masturbation is simply not true. We don't see it anywhere. We're not really seeing it here, right? This is in a very specific context. We're told exactly what he did, and we're told why he did it. And the reason he did it wasn't just for pleasure. In fact, it was to avoid certain consequences. Now, later on in the book of Deuteronomy, it seems here that the woman has no right to refuse. She can't say, I don't like my brother-in-law, or that's okay, right? But in the book of Deuteronomy, where we actually find these laws spelled out, she does have the right to refuse. So the act of engaging with your deceased brother's wife is called yibum, but in Deuteronomy we also have a way of avoiding it, and that is that she does with him chalitza. And chalitza is it's a ceremony which has to do with taking off a sandal, and that's where chalitza, the word chalitza, comes from. She spits at the ground towards him, right? She essentially disgraces him. And because he's done a disgraceful thing, but she doesn't have to marry. And he could refuse also. He can say, I'd rather do chalitza. But I think, I'm not, actually, I just said that. I'm not sure it's true. I think only she can refuse. It's clear that chalitza continues to be practiced up through rabbinic times, but not yibum. That is to say, the rabbis move away from the idea in general. They sort of frown upon doing what the Torah requires, and they use this way out and standardize it so that the default is chalitza rather than actually sleeping with and impregnating his brother's wife. We do see an example of it, though, in the book of Ruth, which we're going to read, and not the brother exactly, the uncle, but the same idea in the book of Ruth, where Ruth becomes Boaz, right? Her uncle becomes, well, her uncle by marriage actually fulfills this duty. It's actually even in the New Testament where Jesus is asked, it's a really odd question. Let's say, a man has 5 sons and they die, and then there's this woman, and ultimately she is with each one of them. This is sort of this theoretical question that's posed to Jesus, and the question is, what will happen in the next world? Because they'll be alive again, right? So there's going to be a resurrection. The questioner says, well, if you say there's a resurrection, then how will this all work out? Because she has all these men, and Jesus says something like, well, there's not going to be sex in the next world. We don't have to worry about I think the languages will all be like angels. So it's a real institution, and Onan doesn't do his duty, and as a result, in verse 10, what he did was displeasing to the Lord, and God also takes his life. Here we know what the reason was. With respect to heir, we have no idea. So Judah says to his daughter-in-law Tamar, remain a widow in your father's house until my third son goes up. And it says, and Judah thought, and it's one of the few times when the Torah actually tells us what people are thinking, and that what they're doing is not ambiguous. Usually, if the Torah in a case like this would simply say he told her to remain a widow in her father's house until Shelah grows up, and we would have no idea what he was thinking. Here, we really want to know, right? And here it's not ambiguous. He says, because he was afraid that he too, the last son, might die like his brothers, right? So, I'm thinking of another place where this kind of thing happens, and that was Jacob and Esau. And you remember when Esau comes, this is the first time when we're talking about the birthright rather than the blessing. And he comes back famished from hunting, and Jacob says, he says, give me some of that stuff you're cooking. And Jacob says, give me your birthright. And he gives it to him, and he eats. And then he gets up and he leaves. And then we hear the narrator making the situation clear by saying, and this is the way that Esau spurned his birthright. Right? Not putting the emphasis on Jacob's taking advantage of his brother's hunger, but on the fact that Esau gave up without hesitation and left, giving up something very valuable. We don't hear this often, but we hear it here. It's also for a widow to go back to her father's house, especially a widow. She has no children. She's been through a couple of husbands. This is not a good thing. It's what he's asking of her is really hard. So she goes back to live, and he says, remain a widow, right? And in fact, we're going to see as the story goes on, she'll be there for a long time, and she's still gowned as a widow. I'm thinking of, England back in the day, where a widow had to wear specific black clothing, whatever it was, for a year until after the death of her husband. It's certainly, there seems to be something here, and it's longer than a year that she is dressed like this, in this visual state of widowhood. So a long time after that, Shua's daughter, again, we don't know her name, the wife of Judah, died when his period of mourning was over. So he mourns her. It's striking that we did not see anything about his mourning his sons. Right? We're not told that. And remember, this is the guy who was instrumental in creating his father's mourning. Hold on one second. I don't know why he even does this, but okay. So he's the one who said, see look at this. Is it your son's coat, right? So his father, he created the situation. He was instrumental in it, where his father assumes that his son is dead and goes into very, very deep, prolonged mourning. Here we don't see that. At any rate, when his period of mourning is over, and notice, by the way, Tamar's period of mourning has not ended. He went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, together with his friend Hira the Adumite, And now Tamar was told, your father-in-law is coming up to Timnah for the sheep shearing. So she knows that he's going, and the sheep shearing, and I think I mentioned that there's a couple of weeks. This is a big festivity, right? It takes a long time. We're on page 235. So it's a party. People get drunk, right? It's a whole fest because the new crop, as it were, of wool is come in. So she takes off her widow's garb, which she has been wearing all this time, covered her face with a veil, wrapping herself up. She sits down at the entrance to Enaim, right? Enaim, by the way, could be wells, sort of means wells. An Ain is a well. Enaim is two wells, double well. That seems to be what gives this place a name. But it also has some significance, as I'll say in a minute, which is on the road to Timnah, right? So Timnah is where they're going for the sheep shearing, and she is there because she saw that Shelah was grown up and she had not been given him as a wife. Long time has passed, right? She's been in her father's house in the morning, and she is a woman of action. And we see her here. This is something heroic about this. So what does she do? She goes down, she sits by the road, and Judah sees her, and he takes her for a harlot, a whore. So his wife died. He's been a year without. And now he sees his opportunity. And why? She had covered her face. So now we know why she's wearing a veil. She's going to entrap him. She doesn't want him to know who she is. So he turns aside to her by the road. You can see this is like, it's an image like a prostitute at a truck stop. I mean, she's hanging out by the road looking for customers. He says, here, let me sleep with you. Now, the Hebrew is a little stronger than sleep with you. I guess a good Yiddish translation would be shtup. I'm going to shtup you, right? Because he didn't know that she was his daughter-in-law. So she says, what will you give me? What will you pay me, right? Because she's a whore. That's what he thinks. This is the way whores deal with sex. And he says, I will send you a kid from my flock. And she says, you have to leave a pledge that you have sent it. So obviously he doesn't have one with him. He's going down to the sheep shearing. So he says, all right, what do you want? Right? This is like a pawn. So she's holding it up. And she says, your seal, your cord, and the staff you carry. So these are important things. The seal and cord, the cord is what ties the seal around your neck. And the seal is the way you sign a document which is unique to you. Everybody has their own seal, and therefore it's clear, it's like a notarized document. You use this, and there's no question that it came from you. So it is a sign of identity, right? And it's unique to the person. Someone said, I read somewhere, it's like a driver's license. Right? She's saying, leave me your driver's license. Now, a staff doesn't have that kind of identity, but it is a symbol of leadership, of social position, right? So she's asking him for both. And he's hot for the deal, so he gives it to her. And he sleeps with her. Again, the Hebrew, much more crude. And she conceives. Unlike other women, she conceives and she goes on her way. So, by the way, coming back to the fact that this place is Enaim, which means double wells, This is a kind of perverse echo of the way people, the patriarchs, had met their wives, right? It was always when Abraham's servant goes to the well, right? And that's where he gets Rebecca, Jacob at the well, right? So there's a certain literary quality to this. This is really quite striking. Sometimes you see, a name is not just a name. Okay, so Judah now has to redeem his pledge. He sends a kid by his friend the Adulamite to redeem the pledge from the woman, but he can't find her. A little bit of an echo of Joseph and his brothers who go, Joseph is sent by his father to find out how his brothers and the flocks are, and he can't find them. He inquires of the people of the town, just like Joseph had a conversation with that man who seems to be an angel. But this is not successful, because he says, where is that? Cult prostitute is a little nicer than it's kadesha, which is a nicer word than zona. It's less crude. Here it's translated as cult prostitute. It doesn't, it's a cult prostitute, and they certainly had prostitutes in pagan temples who would sleep with someone as a sacred act. Doesn't look like that here. She hangs out by he's thinking of a woman who, sits by the road looking for business, but he's using language which is a little more refined. And he says, where's that cult prostitute? And they say, nobody like that here, right? I don't know what you're talking about. So he returns to Judah and he says, I couldn't find her. And not only that, the people said, there's never been someone like her. So Judah says, let her keep them, the tokens, the pawns, lest we become a laughingstock. Right? What is he going to do? Everybody's going to ridicule him. And he says, I did send her this kid, but you didn't find her. Meaning what? Meaning I've been honorable. Right? I tried. Right? I was willing to pay my debt. We can't seem to do that, so let's just keep quiet. About 3 months later, Judah is told, your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the harlot, right? Zanta, right? But here, it's a kind of double meaning, right? She's acted like a whore, but they don't mean, the person who's telling you, they don't mean she was literally a prostitute. She was a woman who acted like a prostitute. She slept with someone who she shouldn't have slept with. But of course, she had no choice. Anyway, what does he do? Judah says, he says, bring her out and burn her, right? It's two Hebrew words. It's like very quick. There's no call her in, let's talk. There's no sense of judicial procedure. He's going to be rid of her. She's a problem. This has been a problem because his son was supposed to marry her. And so let's get rid of her. This is my chance. And she is brought out. And as they're kind of getting her, she sends a message to her father-in-law, I am with a child by the man to whom these belong. And she says, examine these, whose seal and cord and staff are these? This is, and this is why, as I mentioned before we officially started, this is why it's so clear that this is, in fact, an integral part of the Joseph story. Because the language is just like, look, Hakirna, look at this, right? The man who, right? This is just like saying to Jacob, look here, is this your son's cloak? Right? Now, so this is a kind of payback, and Judah recognizes it, and he says, she is more right than I am. Right? And the word is sadka mimeni. So being more right, it has a certain judicial implication here also. Right? She is not guilty, right? In as much as I did not give her my son, right? So he's acknowledging, right? She was driven to desperation in order to have a child. It was his fault, and he was not intimate with her again. Right? So once she's right, it's not, he wasn't looking for love. Right? Um, but she also, and the rabbis make a great deal out of this, she doesn't publicly embarrass, which she could. She sends a message, right? Take a look, see. She doesn't publicly embarrass. And they see her as righteous in all of this. And she becomes a progenitor, actually, of David. And ultimately, according to rabbinic tradition, we know she's a progenitor of David because we see it in the genealogy in the story of Ruth. And according to Jewish tradition, of course, the Messiah will be a descendant of David. So she is like Ruth, a righteous woman. There's not a bit of condemnation for this strategy. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twins in her womb. Another reference back, of course. She was in labor. One of them put out his hand, and the midwife tried a crimson thread to that hand to signify he came out first. But just then, he drew back his hand, and out came his brother. This is just like Jacob and Esau. Jacob, who wanted to come out first, right, grabbing his brother's heel, right? So it's a kind of remembrance of that. And she says, what a breach you have made for yourself. So he was named Peretz. Peretz becomes also part of this line. He becomes an ancestor of the kings of Judah. And afterwards, his brother comes out, on whose hand was the crimson thread in Eastern, known as Zerah. Okay, end of that story. And before we go on to the next sex story, let me ask if there are any questions about this Judah and Tamar. Viola.
If there are more than one brother from when a woman's husband dies, do they normally start with the oldest brother to make that person be the wife or husband of the woman?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to it, but I strongly suspect that that is the case.
Thank you.
If you look at this as a familial responsibility, you would assume that it falls upon the eldest. Now we know that the youngest is quite young, right? Because he's even when the second brother dies, it's a very plausible thing to say wait until he grows up. It's like he's definitely not of age. So the youngest one is quite young, and I suspect that I don't know. We don't have enough evidence of this to say, and even in Deuteronomy, it doesn't say the oldest brother; it just says the brother. But yeah, I think probably that I would say an informed guess, but only a guess. Something else I forgot to mention here about Tamar. Remember, there's this theme about clothing that runs through these stories, right? And Jacob's coat and how he's stripped of his coat, and we're going to see he'll be stripped again in a minute, right? And here she also is changing clothing as she takes off her widow's garb and then she puts it back on. So they're just a theme that runs through here, suggesting that this story is really an integral part of the whole thing. And it's not just the story sort of randomly, oh, by the way, from the life of Judah, this happened. And you could think that it's just meant to build suspense. What's going on with Joseph? He was sent into Egypt. Oh my God, how's he doing? That suspense will be relieved in a minute, but it's more than that. Anything else? Any other questions? Saul?
Yeah, before the story, you mentioned that Judah wanted to kill Yosef, but I don't see this here. It just says Vayitnak Maklu Oto Laha'amito. It didn't say who. Vayomru Ish Elachi Balachalomo
Let me go.
Lazeba.
What chapters and verses, if you can, just speed this along?
This was 20. This was 37. These were verses 18 through 20.
Okay. 37, 18 through 20.
Yeah.
Uh,
Unless Rashi or one of the other
Probably is.
commentators.
I'm just looking. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. You're absolutely right. And I don't know where I have that, but it's very, yeah. Let me look at something too. Hold on one second. Yeah, I don't know. I don't see it in the text. I don't know. Thank you for that. I will try to figure out why I think that or where I found it. And if I
Actually, in verse 26, Judah is the one who
Judah
says,
is the
not
one
kill him.
we can get. No, that's wait a minute. 26. Yeah, Judah's the one who says we can make money on this.
That's after the brothers had plotted to kill him.
After they've already put him in the pit. Right. Reuben is the one who's trying to save him. And Reuben's the one who says put him in the pit, and because he wants to save him. Judah, we don't have a sense of that, but he says, well, we can make some money. I don't know. Thank you. Thank you for that correction, Tandy.
In the beginning, also, you said that Jacob deceived Isaac, his father. So,
didn't hear you.
oh, Jacob deceived his father, Isaac. And then Jacob's sons deceived him, with the coat,
Yes.
making believe that, what happened with Joseph. And payback, I think you said payback, something like that. So what I don't understand, though, is all those years that Jacob, didn't Jacob repent, and in the end he returned the blessing to Esau when he met him? So isn't that episode over in that he is now forgiven?
I think that this process seems to be independent of that. I mean, you can read forgiveness there, but yeah, I don't see in these stories repentance, it's something that is, in a sense, set into motion. And once it's set into motion, I'm thinking of Achashverosh, he sends out the edict and he can't pull it back. This is sort of about the way the world works, rather than God saying, he did that, I'm going to punish him for it, right? And then when he would repent, I will withhold the punishment. It seems to be independent of that as it functions in the Bible. That's all I can say, yeah.
But couldn't it be something new that happened? For example, Jacob probably should not have sent Joseph out, so maybe he was being punished for that.
He certainly shouldn't have sent Joseph out. He certainly should have known better. But because it so clearly fits the earlier incident, I don't think so. Because if he was being punished for that, and we wanted to read it in those terms, then you would expect something would happen to him that would kind of fit those circumstances. And I don't see it here.
Well, I mean, he was punished by Joseph's appearing to be dead.
Yeah, so
in other words, Jacob, payback was that Jacob sent Joseph out, and the payback was he shouldn't have done that. So the payback was he was now being punished by all these.
yeah, no, I understand. I don't think so. That's the best I could.
All right, thanks.
Just don't think it works that way.
Okay, thank you.
But I'm not saying you're wrong. I don't buy it. Okay.
Right.
Anything else before we
Okay.
move? Yeah, Barry.
Yes, I mean, I see a contrast between this story and the story of involving Dinah,
Yeah.
where the thought of
Jacob.
being involved with a woman, a daughter being involved with someone who's not circumcised is just a horrible thing.
Yes.
Whereas the man can go and marry a Canaanite.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I see that. Yeah.
So it's very much a patrilineal
Yes.
society where today Jewishness is inherited
Okay.
by the woman.
Right. That changed
to the mother.
Well, it's not so modern. It's already true in the maybe first, second century. But it's not biblical. Biblical identity definitely flows through the father. It is patrilineal. No question about it. It gets changed, and there are various theories as to why, but it gets changed by the rabbinic period, where it's really flowing through the mother. And therefore, you have at that point two kinds of identity that a person has. One is Jewish or not Jewish, and then the other is what kind of Jewish, right? Kohen, Levi, Yisrael. That's patrilineal, and then Jewish or not Jewish becomes patrilineal. And it's a major change. It was never both up until very recent times, where the reform movement said either. Right? It was never that, but it was at one time through the father, and then it became through the mother. Anything else? Okay, let's go on. We're back in Egypt. And here we are, chapter 39. Joseph was taken down to Egypt. A certain Egyptian, Potiphar, a courtier of Pharaoh and his chief steward, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought them there. And God was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, literally ish matzliach, a word that's even used later on. It's a successful man, and he stays in the house of his Egyptian master. And when his master saw that the Lord was with him and that God lent success to everything he undertook, he took a liking to Joseph. He made him his personal attendant, put him in charge of his household, placing in his hands all that he owned. So very quickly, Joseph rises. This seems, and it'll set a pattern. Very quickly, because God is with him, he's successful. And the Lord blesses Potiphar's house for Joseph's sake, so that the blessing of the Lord was upon everything he owned in the house and outside. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hands with him there, and paid no attention to anything save the food he ate. Right? So he is really the major domo of this house. Joseph does everything. And now we get this. Yosef Yafei Toar v'Yafei Mar'eh. He is very good looking. This is exactly the language which was used for Rachel, right? Extremely appealing. And you would think that that would be a good thing. But as we turn to verse 7, and after this, after he had become so essential to the household, V'tisa eshet Adonav et eneha. So his wife, his master's wife, looked at him and she said, Shikvai imi. How do they translate? Lie with me. Yeah, this is an order. Like, he's a slave and she thinks he's attractive and he's there to do her bidding, right? And you think about this in terms of vulnerability. On the one hand, Joseph is enormously successful, but he's a slave, and that means he's very vulnerable. And he says to her, he says, look with me here. My master gives no thought to anything in his house. All that he owns, he's placed in my hand. He wields no more authority in this house than I. He has withheld nothing from me except you are his wife. So Joseph says, I can't do that. That would be wrong. I have been treated this way. I've been given everything. I can't do this. And he goes further. How could I do this most wicked thing and sin before God? Right? And here we see something we have not seen in Joseph before. Right? And that is this. He was getting along, he was doing well, he got sold by he's never said a religious word but he and God is helping him. And he says this would be a terrible sin. This great evil, hara'ah hagadolah hazot. And as much as she coaxed Joseph day after day, he did not listen to her, to sleep, it says to lie beside her. And you get here, and the commentaries, classic commentaries, see this as her attempt to seduce him. Okay, just lie down. Right? First she said, do it. Right? And now she says, you can see she's trying to wear him down, right? So one such day he comes into the house to do his work, none of the household being inside. She caught hold of him by his garment, and again she gives this order, lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand, and he got away and fled outside. This is, again, he's being stripped of his clothing, just as he was by his brothers. And when he saw that she saw what he had left in her hand and had fled outside, she called to her servants and she said to them, look, he had to bring us a Hebrew to dally with us. This one came to lie with me, but I screamed out loud. And when he heard me screaming at the top of my voice, he left his garment with me and got away and fled outside. Again, the garment becomes evidence, right? Not of Joseph's death, but now here of his alleged infidelity. So she keeps his garment beside her until his master comes home. And then she told him the same story, saying, and let me just see something. It doesn't really say the same story. It says these things, because it's a little bit different. The Hebrew slave who you brought to our house, notice that, you brought. There is a sense of your fault, right? You're the one who introduced this. You brought to our house, came to dally with me, but I screamed at the top of my voice. He left his garment with me and fled. Now remember in the story, she grabbed hold of, she literally stripped him. The scene she's depicting here is he got undressed and he came to her and she screamed. Okay, when his master heard the story, his wife told him, namely, thus and such your slave did to me. He was furious. And the thus and thus your slave did to me sounds like she's giving him details of an erotic encounter. Right? There's something titillating almost about it. So he's furious and he puts him in prison where the king's prisoners are confined. This itself is also surprising. He's a slave. What, king's prison? I mean, this is pretty, certainly there are better, more appropriate places to put a slave who tried to rape your wife if you let him live at all. And this suggests that maybe he doesn't quite buy this story. But on the other hand, he really has to do it. He has to do something. So he puts him into prison. And here we, in some sense, we have a descent into the pit again. Not literally, but pretty much. Right? He's been stripped. He descends into the pit. The Lord was with Joseph. He extended kindness to him and deposed the chief jailer favorably towards him. And the chief jailer put in Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were in the prison, and he was the one to carry out everything that was done there. The chief jailer did not supervise anything that was in Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, God made him successful. So this is Joseph's just remarkable. And he's obviously a person of remarkable charisma, and he's very handsome, but it's more than that. Wherever he is, God enables him to prosper, to succeed. So, good place to stop, and we are actually out of time. So we'll leave Joseph in prison, but doing well there. We'll pick up next time. Any final questions about this? Go ahead, Saul.
Yeah. For Torah readers, Vayima Ain has a shalshelet, which means he wasn't sure, he hesitated. So that's why it's there.
It's like right? It's got kind of quality. And so the Masoretes who put in the trope marks, which is the way you sing it, is also a form of punctuation. And it also, in some cases like this, is almost a commentary, right? The idea that Joseph is kind of hesitating, right? He refuses, but it's not like, oh no, there's something a little, that's really reading into the text. It's not in the text at all, but it is in that in that trope, Mark. So thank you for that. Yes, other things. Barry, and then Francesca.
Yes, it does. And Joseph has no opportunity to object or state his case. At least not in the text. He's just,
No,
he's
he doesn't.
accused and that's it.
Yeah,
he's
it's also hard to imagine how he could, given the fact that he is a slave, given that this is his master's wife. Is he going to call her a liar? I mean, he's just in such a vulnerable position. But you're right, he doesn't have an opportunity, even if he wanted to. Francesca.
That's more or less what I was going to say, but I also have just a bookkeeping question. I mean, a scheduling question. We're going away on Sunday for a few weeks. How long does this class go? What's the last class?
Oh, I don't yet know.
Will you be going in June or stopping in May, or you don't know that yet?
It depends. I usually stop right before Shavuot. That's the end of May. I suspect we will finish by then. There's not that much left, although we do go quite slowly. If we don't finish Genesis, I will continue after Shavuot. If we finish earlier, my plan is to spend a session or part of the session whenever we finish, talking a little bit about Shavuot and touching also on the book. So
the 20th, do you think you'd still, we come back the 19th at night. The 20th, would you be having a class?
Probably.
Okay, so I just know to put that in my calendar for when I get back. Thanks.
But again, there are always the videos on YouTube. So
okay, thanks.
Anything else? So I wish you all a great week.
Thank you, you too.
I'll look into how I have what is obviously a mistaken impression about Judah. And if I have anything to say about that, I will let you know next time. All right, take care, everybody.
Shavua tov.
Shua
Thank
Tov.
you for that.
Okay.